how's the sound check? Is this okay?
This sounds good. Yeah, this sounds good to me.
Great, thank you. All right, so while people are still joining in, let me just do a quick agenda review so you know what to expect from our time together today. There are some familiar names in that list, and then a lot of you are new. So my name is Jennifer Nauer. I'll be moderating today. Here's the agenda in brief. We have about an hour together, maybe a little longer, depending on how long comments go. And the general activities fall into two camps. One is a bit of information giving, Greg, a little bit of an overview regarding municipal services during the interim phase and what you might see or consider regarding level of service and cost of services. And then most of our meeting will be spent hearing perspectives and just getting a sense of what you're paying attention to, worried about, hoping for during this interim phase. So in the chat box, there should be a link to some of the handouts that we would have had in person if you're here, but they'll be linked in the chat, and we'll also pull them up on the screen as a screen share when needed. Why don't I talk a little bit about the process that I'll go through and then pass it over to Greg. So we have about 60 minutes again. I can't guarantee that everyone will have a chance to speak, although I will be doing my best to each person. And towards that end, if you attended forum on Wednesday, I'm going to ask you to hold your comments until everyone else who's in here for the first time has a chance to speak. Two things. If you'd like, you can raise your hand, and that's really easy if you're just signed in. You click the little three dots on your toolbar, and you have an option to raise your hand. If you're just calling in, do we have anyone just on the phone right now?
So we have two.
So if you're just calling in and you wanted to raise your hand, I think you can do so by dialing *5. It's a little bit experimental, but if you wanted to try, if you're just on the phone, dialing *5, we'll see if that's a good way to get to us. Yeah. Okay. If we don't see those, we'll just check in with the phone callers as we go. You may find that as you're speaking, I interrupt every now and then so I can really get a sense of what you're trying to say and relay. I want to make sure that I'm understanding the gist of what you wanted to say, and I'm always going to be returning comments back to this interim phase, even though your comments may go in all kinds of directions. This is a pretty big topic. And to the extent that you can make sure that your microphone is muted and your video is off unless you're speaking, that will help clarify things a little bit, I believe, on the audio format at least. So Greg, at this point, I'll turn it over to you for any information you want to give up front, and then we'll take some questions.
Great. Tim, if you can help out and just let people in as they come into the lobby while I speak, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Just a reminder for everybody, if you are able to turn off your cameras and mute yourselves until you're speaking, that'll hopefully help everybody focus a little bit on the speakers and Jen. So I'm Greg Duggan. I'm the Deputy Manager for the Town of Essex and Village of Essex Junction. Evan Teach, the Unified Manager, is here as well. Thank you all for coming today. Like Jen said, I'm just going to give a little brief overview of why we're here and what we're hoping to accomplish, and then I'll turn it back over to Jen and all of you to speak. This is the second of 3 public forums that we're having about the future of Essex and how to prepare for the Village of Essex Junction's coming vote and subsequent Vermont legislative decision on the creation of an independent City of Essex Junction. The forums are going to be focused on the interim phase, and let me bring up a timeline about what that looks like. So as we talk today, we're focusing on this interim phase, the yellow section here, which basically is from now until the date that the Vermont legislature makes a decision on creating an independent City of Essex Junction. During this phase, we're looking to hear what people are paying attention to, what they value about Essex during this interim phase, and the select board is going to be using that feedback from the forums in the coming weeks and months to help them make decisions that best serve the entire community without favoring one group or another during the interim phase. I'm going to share a few options from the staff perspective and hopefully hear from others on things that have not been considered or aren't mentioned in here. Because we want to hear from residents, absolutely, is the primary goal today. From the staff perspective, we are really focused on providing services to the community and figuring out how to pay for those services. So as we get into this interim phase, especially as the budgeting season comes up in the next month or two, we're going to be looking at the cost of services and how to allocate that cost through the entire community. We can look at items such as staff. We have staff that serves the town and the village, and can look at reallocating the salaries and benefits so that they're paid throughout the entire community and as equally as possible. We can look at public safety services, such as including the cost of the village fire department within the town of Essex budget. And that way, it's a way for everyone in the community, everyone in Essex, to equally be paying for the cost of public safety services in the community. Capital budget is another one that we can look at, and taking a look at the capital plan, capital budget, to see if there's a way to identify more projects in the village or transferring dollars to the village from the town to the village for capital purposes. How we pay for those services, once again, from the staff perspective, there's a few different options. We can cut costs by reducing the level of service. That's not the recommended approach by any means, but it is an option. We can also increase property taxes to pay for services. A local options tax is another way to generate additional revenue to help pay for the services that we provide. We could also look at raising fees, recreation fees, pool fees, development fees, that type of thing. And also any other options that all of you might have that aren't shared here. And I know that there's been some talk about childcare being important and access to programs being important. So certainly want to hear your thoughts on those and anything else that might be on your mind today as we look at this interim phase. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jen and to you.
Are there any questions for Greg about any of that information that he's presented so far? If so, you can raise your hand. I know there are a couple of folks who raised their hand. In any case, I don't know if it's specific to Greg. So Brian, Bruce, or Adam, are any questions related to information that Greg just gave? There is a question from Gina, maybe?
Oh, she just jumped in. So Brian had his hand raised first, and then Bruce, and then Adam.
This is Bruce. I'll let Brian go first. I don't have a question for Greg. I have a statement.
Same here. But I can go if it's the appropriate time for that.
Well, yeah, let's comments. I'm going to show you a little bit about what. Let me share my screen first so you know what to expect. So to the extent, how do I describe this? So at the last forum on Wednesday, as people were talking, I was trying to get the gist of what they were saying and putting it into this Word document. And I've been going back and forth, to be honest, with all this crew about whether to start on a new document or continue to add to the one from Wednesday. And the real challenge is that you might not see yourself reflected in these words yet because you weren't there in the conversation. My hunch is that my inclination is to use this list and continue to build off it. I still want you to use your own words. I still want you to be speaking to points that are important to you, even if you see them here. So it's not to preempt anything you need to say. And makes got one document. So if you're ready, I'd like to hear from you. Brian?
All right. Can y'all hear me?
Sounds good.
Hey, just one reminder,
All right.
if you have your, Brian, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure if you're not speaking, please keep your microphone turned off. Cut down the background noise. Thank you. And
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Jen. My name is Brian Sheldon. I grew up in the village, and now I live in the town after separation. I wanted to thank Jen, town staff, and the Board of Select Persons for holding these listening sessions. We really need to figure out what kind of town we want going forward, and I'm hoping that these will be a step towards figuring out what me and my fellow Essextonians are thinking. I have a couple of concerns that I wanted to express about the way that we have moved forward after the village has moved so decisively to separate since the April vote. There's been those are myths and disinformation. I don't want to rehash how we got to this place because the vote is over. But President Biden's inaugural called on all Americans to call out misinformation when they see it. So I call on the select board to do so as well. It doesn't help Essex to move forward to have repeated and new misinformation swirling around town. Secondly, I want to reiterate what I heard on Wednesday about childcare. I don't have kids myself, but my sister is a single mom, and I watch with horror how she struggled to keep her job teaching, even with childcare. Without childcare like EJRP currently provides, she wouldn't have been able to support herself. That and available workers is already a massive problem in Vermont and Essex. Let's not make it worse by removing a source of high quality and legally licensed childcare that Essex is providing, EJRP strictly. That is bad in general, and it's also bad for recruiting new families to Essex and recruiting their employers to relocate here too. In terms of concern about policing, it would be horribly inefficient to split the Essex Police Department. And worse, the numbers that have been thrown around to split up how the calls are made within Essex are not necessarily indicative of the best way to split up the work they've been doing. So I'm hoping that the select board will not stall on deciding how to do that split because of that misinformation. This is why I started with misinformation. Last,
Sorry,
go ahead, Jen.
A minute to make sure that I've got it. So when you talk about policing, you're looking at please do not stall on deciding how this will look both in the interim phase and in the transition phase if it comes to be. Is that right? Because you're trying to figure out.
I mean, honestly, my concern is inaction. Seems like the board of select persons, they often select that they don't. They often state that we don't know what the legislature is going to do. Of course, this is true, but it's as if the board is acting like they think the ledge will stop separation, as opposed to not actually knowing.
Okay.
So we need to cover all bases.
Yeah.
It's going to be it's especially given that per the numbers put out on September 27th, it's going to be expensive for the town after separation for us homeowners out here if we do nothing. So we need to prepare for separation, even if you disagree with me that separation is likely.
Okay.
So.
And, I hope this represents what you were thinking, that please do not stall on deciding what these services either look like and how they'll be provided, both for the interim phase and for the future phases.
Love it. I'm going to have you write for me now on, Jen. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. But I did cut you off. Was there anything else that you wanted to say?
I guess lastly, I just sort of had a high level concern in that remember that the village can separate unilaterally, both from law, both from precedent, and definitely from the will of their electorate. This future city of Essex Junction does not need us. So this is not a negotiation between equals anymore. And I don't think we have the leverage that some members of the Board of Select Board think that we do. So I don't think negotiating as if we're from a position of strength will get us the best deal for both sides of the village line. And that's it for me. Thank you, Jen.
Yep, I'm going to stay thoughtful about how to honor that concern. I think part of what you're looking at is just trying to figure out how this unfolds in a way, and it might relate a little bit to this point about representation and how different people get their voices in the mix while these decisions are getting decided, how proposals are getting considered, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to me about representation. I mean, I voted for all 5 of the select board members, and I think that they are people of good faith. I just like to see them act. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Bruce.
Hi, this is Bruce Post, and I live at 1 Cindy Lane. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment on what I call the smorgasbord forum. Why? Because it seeks to cover a little bit of this and a little bit of that. From why did merger fail to village proposals for town concessions in advance of separation to what the new town of Essex might look like in the future if separation happens. Therefore, I want to briefly discuss 3 topics: why merger failed, the lack of faith that our voices will make any difference, and what to do about separation.
Okay, Bruce,
For-
before you go there, your comments may go in all kinds of different places, but to the effect that I'll be actually trying to pay attention to the page, I'm going to always be bringing them back to what you're trying to say, how does it relate to this interim phase? So please take it where you need to go and note that that's where my reflection will try to bring it back to. Didn't mean to.
Well, as you know, I've been part of a lot of these discussions. And I've seen one of the things said is, where am I now? What is important to me? And I think a lot of this lacks a context. And I want to build that context because it leads to my conclusion and my recommendations. Now, so I don't know, you've thrown me off kilter, Jen. And so exactly ask me a question and I'll tell you my answer.
Okay, what is important to you what's important to you at this moment? And you can start wherever that takes you.
Well, first of all, I want people to understand why merger failed. And part of the reason was the boards did not listen to the people. And this whole started out with the staff saying, we don't know why merger failed. And I believe it is because the boards failed to listen to people when they made a specific choice, according to the KSV survey, that we wanted multiple districts. And we wanted to get beyond the town-village split. KSV also reported only 10% of those generally opposed to merger would consider voting in favor of the proposal if they had that kind of representation. And given the fact that it failed by only 19 votes on March 2nd, if just 1% of those people, 37 people, changed their votes, we wouldn't be here today. I also think I have a lack of faith that our voices will make any difference. And one of my concerns is, despite this forum, that there are numerous secret meetings going on. They're euphemistically called executive session to discuss the village's potential separation vote. No one else in the town other than the insiders know what they're discussing or perhaps negotiating. Our select boards had 4 closed meetings that I can count: June 7th, 15th, 21st, and July 21st. We don't know what's happening, and we're losing the opportunity to truly have a dialogue, particularly with the 11,000 people who do not live in the village and have to respond to the agenda we've got before us today. Lastly, too, I would vote for separation if I had the chance. I come to believe that there are too many differences between the town outside the village and the village to justify merger or even the status quo. The village is much more part of the urban core of Chittenden County. By contrast, the town outside the village is neighborhoods with large lots and a decidedly rural jewel. Also, I believe until there is a separation vote approved by the legislature, the select board should get out of the way. Let the village be the village and set its own course and stop working out deals. No negotiation until separation. I agree with.
Dan, for a minute.
Go ahead.
Yep. So part of what you're saying is that I'm going to bring it back to that doubt about voices making a difference and trying to make sure that input is reflected. There's a concern brought up on Wednesday as well about the difficulty of having these negotiations publicly, but also the difficulty of having them happen in executive session where you can't follow them. And so I think that's duly noted. As you move into this next phase, one thing to think about, I'm also fascinated by this negotiation as it unfolds. It's long-term and there are a lot of voices and parties in the mix. But to your point about when votes happen, I do want to make a point that those phases are defined by specific votes. So to the point again that you want the select board to be paying attention to something during this interim phase, just to bring it back to that. Go right ahead.
Well, I don't think we should be having any negotiations during this interim phase because this vote has not taken place to separate and the legislature hasn't approved it. And I don't believe we should be negotiating issues that will ease the village to separation. Separate first, then negotiate. I believe that very strongly. And Dawn Hill-Fleury, our select board member, has talked about transition phase discussion should not take place until after the vote. And even the governance subcommittee for the merger said in its 2018 report that contractual services should be done by both corporate entities when they agree to share. And those corporate entities do not yet exist. The new city of Essex Junction doesn't exist. The new town of Essex doesn't exist. And I think we're being given a bum's rush to try to make agreements that we don't have equal representation or a vote to approve. So there's my view.
No, that's good. I'm going to pause there for a second and pull up that cases again, Greg. So to Bruce's point, is there anything, Greg, that you and Evan can add about sort of the point about contractual entities and how when negotiation takes place is about changes to any contracts as it relates to this phase document? Any clarity you can bring to that, or no?
The general gist is, as we understand it, the village wants to know what they can tell their voters as to what their government services will look like and potentially what that cost is. And the town is looking at it somewhat similarly. What services are we going to share so that we can tell the remainder of the citizens what might happen if the village does legally separate?
Okay, and so I think there's that piece of, I think back to Bruce's point about in this phase, there's a lot of developing and planning and exploring about what those options are. And that's separate from when changes actually take effect. And I think, again, looping back to that representation issue of not wanting that exploration to get too specific until there's good representation across the board. Have I got that right? If you're still there.
Who are you talking to now?
I was talking to Bruce, who I was just trying to sum up what's one of those points you landed on.
Well, one of the points I've landed on is I think this is morphed from a staff-driven effort to find out supposedly why merger failed. And now we're into negotiations about a new corporate entity, which might be called the City of Essex Junction. I think it's premature. And if we are going to have these negotiations, I think the select board then should appoint citizens of the town outside the village who will be those of the new corporate entity of the new town of Essex to help decide any discussions that the select board enters into on our behalf, those 11,000 who will be left behind.
Yep.
Thank you.
I understand. This is not going to quite do justice, but I'm going to just make a placeholder. Looking for clarity from the select board about when contractual changes and agreements are to be negotiated, knowing that they might be explored now, but it's a negotiation puzzle that you bring up, and there's no real pithy way to grab it. But I'll let that percolate for a bit. Thanks so much. Let's go to the next commenter.
Which would be Adam Duhard.
Adam.
Hi, Jen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Yep, that's great.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so I had, I think it comes down to three concerns. I'll try to stay on topic. My first one reflects what I think you have at the top of your Word document, which is a general concern, being an individual who lives outside of the village, about how current childcare camps and after-school programs are going to continue. I think a lot of those are run by EJRP, and being outside of the village, it's a real concern for working parents. Regardless of if you call it a camp, after school, it is still childcare and it's accredited, and that's a real major benefit to us. And so that's certainly something, that I'm paying attention to. Let me know whenever, if you have a question or if I should just keep on going.
Keep going, go right ahead.
Okay, great. The other thing that I'm really paying attention to and I'd like to see more of is clarity and continued communication from the select board. I would echo what Brian said, especially living outside of the village. There is a lot of misinformation, a lot of reframing, a lot of restructuring, which frankly, I think is one of the major reasons that the village is trying to separate and that they're tired of that. And I would really like to see and hear more from the select board. You know, regardless of how those communications are done, I think receiving an accurate message is appropriate. You know, when I think Raj spoke on, was it Wednesday night, to clarify how difficult it is to do these negotiations, it really helped reframe a common misperception among a lot of us who were listening. And that's what we need going forward, because separation, no separation, there's still going to be a lot of hurt feelings. And we really need that strong leadership from our select board in that regard.
So I'm just saying, looking for accurate messaging about ongoing efforts, developments, and binds are the challenges. And having that articulated, even if they're not solved, somewhat reassuring to get the context that you're looking for.
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And you had one more thing?
Yeah, it was what I'm hoping for, especially from the select board, is the opposite of Bruce. You know, whether or not separation has gone through, we should be preparing for that, all of us. If it doesn't go through, then we've prepared for nothing, but at least we were prepared. I think it was like one of the select board members, Vince, had said, I don't know if an asteroid's going to hit Earth, but I certainly want something that's going to knock it out of the sky to protect me if that is the case. And so for me, what I'm watching is not just for clearer communication and more consistent communication from the select board, but more engagement that further prioritizes figuring out what those outside of the village are interested in, so that we don't find ourselves in a place where separation completes and we get the raw deal because frankly we were not prepared.
Okay. I'm going to say, yep. So it's breaking, I don't know how, if this is the final categorization, but I'm going to lump these together about how negotiation takes place. They don't have to agree. But in any case, a couple things to be looking for there. Thank you. Adam, are you all set?
I am done. Thanks, Jen.
Okay. We've got someone waiting in the lobby, Craig.
I've been trying to admit them and they're just not
not going through. Okay. As long as you're on it. So the next comment. So the next hand that's up is Irene. Irene, we heard from you, I believe, on Wednesday. So and Gabrielle also heard from you on Wednesday. I'm going to keep going through this list until I see folks that I don't recognize from Wednesday's forum and then come back.
Jen?
Yes.
This is Gabrielle. I did not speak on Wednesday.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking about the select board. Then go right ahead. Please do.
Thanks. Although I did want to give Irene the chance to speak in case she was responding to Greg's comments from the beginning.
Irene, did you have a question about Greg's like a question about the presentation earlier on?
Yes, I did.
Oh,
Thank you, Gabrielle, for that introduction.
What's the question to Greg?
This is the first time that I have ever seen the idea of moving the Essex Junction fire budget into the town budget, and I just wondered where that came from. Thank you.
Sure. It's been mentioned in these memos and preparations for these meetings at board meetings in the past. It has not been a huge discussion point thus far, but it's one of the options that staff has identified going forward to ideally, it's a way to have everybody in the community pay the same amount for public safety services. That would theoretically benefit all if separation does not happen. If separation does happen, it helps prepare the town a little bit more for the total cost of providing fire services for just the town outside the village and the fire department that would be serving the remaining portion of the town. That's the reasoning behind it, and it has not had too much discussion yet, but it has been brought up and included in memos about this topic.
Irene, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Gabrielle, go right ahead.
Thank you, Jen. So there are a few things that matter a lot to me for the interim period. Ensuring continued fair and equal representation for all town residents to the select board is essential for me. I hear the frustration of those who want dedicated representation to the select board for town outside the village prior to a potential separation. For the interim period, whatever opportunities might be provided for town residents outside the village must be provided to the rest of the town. It would be unfair to claim that the trustees speak for my interests as a town resident to the select board. That is not their job. Their job is to represent my interests as a village resident. I realize this may seem to be exactly the same thing to some. It's not. As long as I'm a resident of the town, I expect fair representation now and during the interim period. I expect the same level of representation as any other resident of the town. We all have an equal voice. The select board should do nothing to affect that. I agree that reliable, licensed childcare is essential for our community. I support the continued provision of childcare by the Essex Junction Recreation and Parks Department to non-residents in the town over the coming months of the interim period. I support all efforts to help town outside the village residents manage the impact of the departure of the YMCA due to COVID. Once the COVID pandemic is past, I would support the possibility of continued childcare by EJRP to non-village town residents, provided that it is financially sustainable and does not have a negative effect on availability of childcare for village residents. I would expect the same thing in regards to the access to the Essex Police Department post-separation. I want to see our two boards negotiate a clear agreement to assure the future of the Essex Police Department as the law enforcement provider and dispatcher for both future municipalities should be separate. I've begun to hear comments at both board meetings about alternatives. Those are, in the opinion of our police chief, and I share it, to be avoided. I don't want to see the boards waste time assuring a plan B. I'd like to see the boards reach an agreement in the interim period prior to the vote, which will assure that neither the trustees nor the select board have to spend any time or energy assuring that we have a law enforcement provision for the future city of Essex Junction. I understand voices that we're hearing today in other forums that there should be, that the select board should wait on any of those agreements. I strongly disagree because the trustees understandably have to assure that there is law enforcement in place at the time of the vote. And we all, I believe, I really have yet to hear any voices saying it's in our best interest in this community should we separate our police law enforcement services. So I would urge the select board and our trustees to negotiate that in advance, and it is the highest priority of the trustees. Finally, for the interim period, as long as the village remains part of the town, I would look to the select board to not disadvantage any of its current residents in any negotiations or any forums or in the course of its business. I look to the select board to be transparent and responsive to residents. I hope that we will treat each other with respect and listen to understand, even when we're feeling scared, angry, or frustrated. How we treat each other now, resident to resident, and through our elected boards will define the future of our community. Thanks.
There's a lot in there, and it's well said. I am wondering what you'd like reflected about this piece of being so mindful during this time that select board is representing village and town outside the village, being very careful of the decisions that either party makes right now doesn't inadvertently favor or disenfranchise a resident based on where they are geographically. I hear that piece. I do want to loop back, Gabrielle, to what you're saying about representation, because I'm not sure that I caught it on this sheet, and I want to make sure it's there. Do you mind reviewing that with me for a moment?
Absolutely.
So here's what I have. These words mostly came out of the last forum on Wednesday. So how to ensure that town outside the village residents' views were fully represented during the interim phase. But I think you had a slightly different take on this, and I just wanted to catch it.
Yeah.
So could you help me understand that again?
Yeah, so several residents from the town outside the village, I believe, are under, this is what I, as a village resident, would call the misunderstanding that I'm overrepresented in the town of Essex. I'm as much represented by the select board as anybody. When it comes to the village, I'm represented by my village trustees. And I know it may not feel like a distinction, but it is. If I want to have an impact on anything to do with town government,
Yeah.
I generally am going to work through my select board. I understand that the village trustees do negotiate with the town related to town services,
Yeah.
but I look to my select board to represent me on town issues. If I have an issue with the Essex Police Department, with the Essex Parks and Rec, with the Essex Library, with the Essex Fire Department, I don't go to my trustees and ask them to speak on my behalf.
Yep.
I go to my select board.
Yes.
So how that relates, oh, go ahead.
Well, so what I'm trying to figure out is there's a perception that you're talking about, which you just like to somehow, part of what you're saying is that is this belief that the town select board is operating on the whole village and town. And your framework for that, your construct, isn't that those elected officials are separating between regions.
No, we don't. I mean, I honestly don't know where my elected officials actually, I mean, I know that I can tell you that 4 of them live in the town outside the village and 1 lives inside the village. I honestly don't know if Tracy lives on a farm in rural Essex or in Lang Farms. I don't know where people live. I don't care. They've taken a pledge to represent all of us. I know some people feel that they don't, but that's not how I feel. What I do want to make clear, though, is that I don't get represented by the village trustees on town matters. I get represented by the select board. So I would object strongly to any opportunity for some residents of the town to have some sort of construct where they get a voice to the select board that is not also provided to me based on where I live.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
We all get the same access. I'm open to that. If we,
Yep.
I would strongly object.
The amazing thing, or maybe the frustrating thing about trying to take really complex things like this and distill it into one little list is that in words, and especially in phrases, they don't have nearly the nuance that all of your speaking words do. For now, Gabrielle, I'm going to put that note just as a counterbalance to just thinking about how different residents' views are represented and considered during the interim phase. And I think it also connects somewhere on this list about having more exchanges as this unfolds. So if you're okay, I'm preparing to move on to the next comment.
Did you capture my comment about transparency from the boards? I would concur with everyone so far who's spoken about. I understand the need for executive session,
Yep.
but I don't understand why we as residents and the public can't be informed of the topics being covered and that there's progress being made. I just don't understand why there has to be absolute silence about what happens in an executive session. We're told sometimes they're having an executive session to discuss a staff issue. Great. I don't expect to know anything more than that, but I do know that, right? Why can't I be told that they're having an executive session to talk about topics related to separation and then list those topics? I have no evidence to suggest that the select board is having conversations about anything that's of most relevance to this community. For example, the police department, right? So it would be helpful. And I'm getting some responsiveness from the board. Actually, all of us are getting some responsiveness on that, but I would encourage the board to ask themselves, what can they let the public know? And then let us know.
Thank you. Got it. Thank you. Next comment.
Lee Phillips.
Go ahead, Lee.
Hello, thank you. I think mine comes under concern, but someone may have addressed it already. I think I saw something about it, but I'm going to go ahead and just shut me up if you need to.
Go ahead.
My biggest concern is the tone of many of the comments I'm hearing from the public during select board and trustee meetings. Some of the delivery is very polished, very professional, no raised voices, but the underlying message seems to be divisive and angry and intent on seeing the worst in every situation, every board decision, and individuals in some cases. For instance, I keep hearing that the Board of Trustees has presented a list of demands to the Select Board. I've attended virtually most of the Select Board and the trustee and the joint meetings. And then I went back and read or listened to them. And it appears to me that the Select Board solicited trustee input and that the trustees provided a document with proposals, not demands. But so many people have said demands that I actually went and looked up the definition of a proposal in both Black's Law Dictionary and in Merriam-Webster's. And Merriam-Webster defines a proposal as an act of putting forward or stating something for consideration. And Black's defines a proposal as an offer. And so I'm not sure how an offer or putting something forward for consideration could be termed a demand. And having it framed as a demand is upsetting to me. And I think it puts the wrong framing around working together, which I think we should be doing. The other thing is, I've lived here all my life, and I'm roughly the same age as Dirt, so it's a long time. My family's been here really since the town was around. I mean, almost 2 centuries. I come from a long line of diarists, and I've gone back through and found diaries from the 1700s, and I've been reading them. And going through that, I have never, none of those record such acrimony or venomous rhetoric when things were happening in the town or when the village started in the 1800s and things like that. Going through the 50s, there just doesn't seem to be. Maybe my family wasn't really much into divisive things and didn't record it, but there's record of these activities and these actions, but they are not talking about neighbor against neighbor. I hope that people understand that not everyone in the village wants to separate, and friends in the town, some of them don't want to separate. And as an average citizen, I don't have much influence on what the board members do, other than offering public comment and voting. And so please don't personalize those residents for something that the board has done. For me, a particular concern is the police department, as the speaker, Ms. Smith, said. Remember, the village created the police department back in the 1890s, and it was the village police department between the village fire department and Lincoln Hall up until the 1980s. So we do have some skin in the game there, so far as I can tell. And we need it. I don't understand why it has to be an acrimonious division if, heaven help us, it is going to be a division.
So Lisa,
Yes.
So watching how residents and elected officials characterize proposals or swap considerations is something that you're mindful of, but what you're concerned is that the discourse is more divisive than it needs to be, and you're hoping that neighbors aren't characterizing neighbors.
Yes. Yes. And, there's some of us, for instance, if I walk 10 feet out of my backyard or out of my side yard, I'm in a town park. I can't get away from the town. I almost live in the town. So, and I'm impacted by things that are in the town. I have people who are coming to use a town park blocking my driveway and parking on my lawn. I have some of the people who come to the park have very nicely using my back fence as a urinal and climbing over my fence to get their disc and things like that. So I'm impacted by what happens in the town. It's just a fact of life. We all live together. But in closing, I would like to remind people how we got to the village and town outside the village model, and ask people to think about whether or not that's going to happen to the town outside the village at some point. As I've been listening to the select board meetings and things, I'm hearing people talk about they want more sidewalks. They want their sidewalks plowed so the children aren't walking in the street. They want more crosswalks. They want more childcare and things. There's more, for Vermont, urban, suburban areas developing in the town. Is there going to be a point where the town outside the village is going to come up with the same conundrum that the town and village have, where people out on, I don't know, Weed Road, the far end of Old Stage, Sleepy Hollow, they're not going to want to pay for these services that they're not getting, they don't want, and they don't use?
Yeah. So Lee, one of the things you're remaining curious about are what lessons, what kind of systemic parallels or lessons would you want to?
Guess we should move on.
Yeah. Would you want people to be aware of, just knowing that there might be patterns here that repeat, that are more systemic or procedural?
I think I'm going to sound like Sesame Street, but please be kind to people and try to learn some lessons. And remember that we may all be walking in each other's shoes at some point. And I really hope that no one has bad intentions and everybody has an agenda, whether they realize it or not. And hopefully none of those agendas are for ill.
Yep. Lee, thank you.
Thank you.
So Stephen.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So just listening to the discussion and bringing up a few points. I think on the policing side, or on any negotiation item, but that's a big one. Don't get hung up on on a precise payment or, how the costs are allocated. Do your best, pick something. And, we always know that nothing is cast in concrete and can never change again. If something is tried for a little while and it's not fair or doesn't work, we can all, make a change. It doesn't have to go on for infinity. So I think, where Brian was saying, don't just, go to indecision. Let's, try to make the best decision and then, move forward and adjust as needed. And in terms of the comments made about don't negotiate anything until it's a certainty, when I've been involved in various company mergers and acquisitions and divestitures, and there's always been negotiations and things set up and plans made before everything's approved. And because otherwise, the bell rings when things are approved and you're left standing there completely unprepared. So I think it makes sense to do due diligence now and come up with the best that we can on a variety of things. I think also the comments on the communication clarity to counter the misinformation, the worst thing that you can do is to not say what reality is. And it's best to over communicate, if anything, because people are always going to go to the source. And so if the select board is putting out, a virtual comments or whatever, not just minutes, but when I was on the board of trustees, we used to have the newsletter that would go out to give here's our unfiltered comments on topic X, Y, and Z. And I think that's really helpful to just over communicate.
And helpful because why?
Because that will counter misinformation. I was referring to, I can't remember who said it earlier about the misinformation being out there. And if you're not hearing a lot from the select board directly, or you kind of have to pull it out of the minutes a little bit, compared to people that are speaking outside of the government structure in one way or another. Everyone has their own opinion, and that's fine. But if the select board just comes out and says what they're thinking, then that stands on its own. Then you know what they're thinking. There's no misrepresenting what they say.
Isn't it incredible how complex this particular issue is? As thinking evolves and people come at it with their particular understandings and understanding new nuances, and then as a group entity to try to communicate what the group's nuances are, it's really complicated. So I just, in response to your comment, I really appreciate what it takes to stay in this conversation as a resident and as an elected official. It's not an easy feat.
Yep. And just to be clear, I was an elected official a long time ago. So. But anyway, not now.
Yeah.
So, and then I think the comments on executive session, I really, I totally understand that. That makes sense. Because as someone who was involved in executive sessions on this topic back in the day, and yeah, nothing was ever said. And then people are left wondering, well, what did they talk about? And again, there's all kinds of legal ramifications, and so that trumps everything. So that's the most important thing. But within the what's has to be silent because of the legal rules. I thought the idea of mentioning the topics, or at least the high level frame, hey, we were talking about, separation, the city, et cetera. And we talked about police. And then you at least know, like, hey, they're like engaging, and you don't know the details, and that's fine. And that's maybe best. But I agree, then it feels like things are moving forward. And, there's not just this silence. So, and so I've been on both sides of that. And so that's why I actually like that suggestion. But again, if it's not legal, it's not legal. But if it is legal, it's a great idea.
All right. So does that?
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Bring comments to a close then?
Yeah. I know we're running out of time, so I just kind of want to get in and make those couple comments.
We are running short on time, although we will try to get to how many. I know I still see 2 hands, and I don't know if there are other folks who haven't raised their hand yet, but had something they hoped to say. Could you raise your hand now just so I can see the numbers?
There's also 3 people on the phone who may or may not have anything to say.
Folks are on the phone. I think if you want to try pressing *5, that might be a good signal to us that you're raising your hand. It's a bit of an experiment. That's one thing I'm learning about Microsoft Teams. All right, let's go with these next 3 comments then that I see, and then we'll go to folks on the phone. So Dennis, Will, and then Irene. Dennis, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. I got on a little late, so I missed quite a bit. One of my main concerns is, and this goes back to why the merger failed. It seems that the village trustees are setting up conditions or priorities they wish to see prior to separation, and I believe strongly that if they want to separate, they should be separating with no conditions at all. And if the vote passes for separation, then we can go to the table and discuss what would be shared, what wouldn't be shared, or what their total cost is going to be. I mean, we've been through this many times with the village, with merger, with Parks and Rec and stuff. I mean, I don't believe the town or the select board should be honoring those conditions for separation or proposals for separation and stuff like that. And secondly, I believe the select board needs to be more transparent in their actions, especially when they're doing with these meetings and stuff like that, because a lot of us really don't have the opportunity to stop what we're doing at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening on a particular day to attend a meeting and stuff like that. I was fortunate that I was available today for this meeting, and that's basically what I have to say.
Okay, So I'm taking two things from that. One is that you're wary of making changes during the interim phase. And then I'm also just catching, again, an appreciation for the more information, the better, so you can stay up to date with developments.
That's correct. And you're right. The very first one was that there should be no preconditions for separation during the interim.
Okay, thank you. So Will, you're up.
All right, thanks a lot. So I'm Will Skolichenko. I'm a resident of Sand Hill Road, so TOV, if for those that like to characterize it that way. And I guess I'd just like to echo a couple of the points made before. I do believe that I think that if you're, we're all familiar with the phrase, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. I believe that if we're not being very intentional about, I mean, it's unfortunate that we are where we are right now, and we all have various theories and or accusations potentially about how we got here. But I do believe strongly that, I don't think it's as serious as an asteroid hitting the Earth, but I do believe strongly that if we are not planning for what will, the village doing what they can rightfully vote to do, considering what they've been forced into, then I don't see how we can't, I think we need to plan accordingly. So I don't see, and I think to echo some of the others in terms of regarding just the this, in nod to civility and communication and coordination with each other. I mean, I consider myself a resident of Essex, not the town outside the village, not the village, obviously, but just Essex. And it is unfortunate that it won't continue to be that way. But I also want to make sure that, because as I see the seeds being sown now to further kind of develop a model of divisiveness and conflict, I'd hate to see that, what we've seen in terms of conflict between the perceived TOV and the village carry forward post-separation into what would become a new town of Essex. So that's certainly a concern that I have, kind of looking a little bit more towards the future. And I do agree with some of the comments that were made the other night as well regarding fair representation. I do believe that we do need a diverse group of citizens, from what will become the town of Essex, because it is a very, even without the village, it is a very diverse place. You've got the Essex shops in the surrounding neighborhood, or the Essex experience in the surrounding neighborhoods. You've got, some very small, tight-knit communities, and then you've got a lot of rural areas, pushing out towards Westford and Milton. So, it is very diverse, and I do agree with a few others that spoke today and also Wednesday that there needs to be some fair representation in that regard.
Okay, before my brain gets too full up. So how to counter perceived conflict between town outside of the village and the village. You're just trying to figure out how do you keep this civil and kind of get back on track of Essex.
Right,
regardless of what happens to the corporate entities. But you've also just talked about representation a bit and how diverse it is. This did come up on Wednesday as well, and I'm going to highlight just a piece there to see if it speaks to what you were thinking of.
That is indeed what I am referring to.
And I think that might be showing up somewhere else too, but I just don't know. Oh, right here, it's right above it.
Yep, and I heard a couple people speak to that on Wednesday.
The other piece of one of your comments I haven't written down, but I'm just trying to figure that out, is how to honor the space that the town of Essex, the village of Essex is in right now, how to honor that space to explore and plan, given that a separation advisory vote has passed. Is that part of, that might be where you started?
That is where I started. I think that's more of the, planning, basically planning for success, planning for a successful outcome, given the probability that we will become two separate entities.
Yeah.
And, that said, I know there's certain people that are proponents of a what they call separate and share. And I think part of that is going to be having 2 young children and having a lot of friends and neighbors with young children. I think understanding not just police, because that's very important, but also the child care after school services, things like that, which we would absolutely hate to lose, especially knowing that Essex Junction has a much more robust program, both kind of pre-cohabitation and sharing of services, and probably post-separation.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Will, are you all set?
I'm good. Yeah. Thank you.
So Irene, you're up.
Thank you. I see people that have not yet spoken, so I'll wait till the end if you'd like.
Okay, so what I have on my list, actually, you're right, there are some new hands. What I had originally was now to go to folks on the phone, and then I'll get folks who have their hands up that I hadn't seen yet. So anyone who's calling in on the phone, you can unmute by, I think it's *6, and chime in if you have something to say, because from this end, we can't see if your hand is raised or not. Okay, so I'm going to go in order. Who is RM?
Hi, that's me. This is Risa Marin. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. I live in the village, and I'd like to add on to what everyone else has been saying about the vitriol that goes on, which I really believe comes from so much misinformation being disseminated. For example, the select board very clearly requested from the trustees what their suggestions and recommendations and wants were in terms of sharing, dividing, working together regarding the interim period and separation. The trustees responded, and that response has been deemed to be demands from the village. It's not demands. And my counterexample of that is I look at the, I'm going to refer to it as the handout because I don't know what else to call it, regarding, what staff has come up with possible scenarios.
Yep.
Those aren't demands from the staff. The staff isn't demanding that the town take over the village fire department. The staff isn't demanding that suddenly, in the light of the village is probably going to vote in separation, and what are we going to do in that interim? They're not demanding, oh, maybe now we should look at equalizing everything. These are suggestions. These are recommendations, perhaps, but I think they're more likely, let's come up with some ideas here, folks.
Yeah, so part of what you're recognizing is that there are maybe imperfect ways to be getting information back and forth, especially on this scale, but you're hoping that it is still characterized as information and options under consideration and exploration rather than demands at this point.
Yeah, demands makes it a whole other thing. And there are so many people who love spreading disinformation who grab onto a word like demand and run with it. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, so I'm in the intro. I am very so aware of the time, but I think part of what you are acknowledging too is that this is a really unsettling and destabilizing process for people who work in the town and village, who live in the town and village, and who represent the town and village. And to the extent that exchanges about this issue can continue to be exploratory and ask for more information and offer input rather than trying to characterize them, your sense is that everyone then is in a better position to look forward.
Exactly. You're doing an incredible job of grabbing the syntax of what people are saying and the essence of what people are saying and removing the heat. As Lee Phillips said earlier, there's a tone that comes across so often that is so accusatory, and that doesn't get anyone anywhere. The it doesn't matter anymore why merger failed. It did. The village has now decided we want to look into separation and bring it to a vote. I think though we can't at all guess as to what the legislation is going to do, I think it's pretty fair to say there's a good chance that the village is going to vote to separate. And then we're going to do all we can to get the legislature to approve it. As I look at that handout, it seems to me, if I'm looking at it with the same eyes that those people who are saying the village demands things, I see that as, oh, suddenly they want merger light, because that will make the legislature say, oh, we don't need to do this anymore. See, the town is already acquiescing to all of this. So, keeping it constructive and positive and not looking at the others, quote unquote, as enemies. There was somebody in Wednesday's meeting who actually said, well, I have a friend in the village. And I thought, really? We've gotten to this level of discourse now?
Well, so I am gonna reel it back in part because of time, but also because I think you're hitting on something that is such a good illustration, and it's a reminder more that I don't know how to put it into this document, but I will honor it to say that in moments of tension, when things are feeling really destable or unstable, sometimes tone isn't always the most polite. And part of what you're looking for is a commitment to keep bringing it back to a place that's asking questions and trying to understand, how did someone make that connection? What are they wondering? What are they worried about, hoping for? And I think we'll leave it at that for now, because it's not something that you do once. It's an iterative process, right? It's what you're saying. It happens over and over in every meeting, in every exchange, in different comments, etc.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. So it looks like we've got Danielle, and then Irene has been waiting as well. So Danielle, go right ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Go ahead.
Awesome. I think that I would just want the select board to acknowledge that the interim for the village and perhaps the trustees looks quite different than the interim for the town and the select board, perhaps. I hear a lot of people wanting to wait until after the vote for separation to try to work out some sharing. However, it's my understanding that the village is looking to pursue getting as much information nailed out before the vote, so voters have accurate, conclusive information. So I would just kind of get the select board thinking what then happens when their interim looks a little different, when our interim is all kind of figured out and we're just waiting for the legislature. It might not be the appropriate time for the village anymore to try to negotiate anything. It might be done.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I get stuck. I'm all for, I understand wanting to wait if you don't know what's going to happen. Although I have a child, so I'm always planning and trying to forecast what may happen, and it might be wrong. But I just think we need to respect that. And I hear a lot of people wanting transparency. And I think that the trustees have always done a great job with that. And it gets misconstrued as demanding. And they're just being forthcoming. I do recall that we were saying, if merger doesn't pass again, we're going to look to separate. And so they thought it was threatening. And well, no, it was transparency, because now that's what's happening. So again, if we're no longer ready to negotiate anything now, we may not be available as a village to do it after. So it's not trying to stronghold anybody. It's literally, hey, we're just going to be forthcoming with information. So you can call it whatever you want, and make it look however you want, but that's just the truth.
Okay, so I'm going to say that to think through how the interim looks different depending on whether someone lives in the village or the town outside of the village, because I may be trying to get good information about conditions post-vote in order to develop options and understand what the options are. Yes?
Yes.
What impacts these options would have.
And I guess I would just want to say, is the town, as the select board, going to feel okay if we, we say, yes, we want to separate, and then the legislation says, yeah, okay, go for it. And they're kind of left without negotiating anything because we've figured it out as a village.
Oh.
And I think that would be disheartening because, I still feel like we're all one. So.
Right. You want to make sure that everybody has done the planning they need to do. I think maybe it goes to planning for a successful outcome if separation takes place.
Yeah, regardless of what happens.
Yeah. Okay. Danielle, thank you. Did that conclude your comment?
Yep, that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Irene.
Thanks very much. I heard a lot about venom from people and incivility, and I would offer that in some cases, in my experience, it's frustration. There is some systemic discrimination against those of us who don't have exclusive representation in the room at joint meetings. So if you hear someone like myself a little frustrated, please don't assume that I'm hating people or that I'm saying things because I don't have friends in the village or something. I'm just frustrated because this is something that I highlighted first to the merger task force that was working on a plan in 2005. And I'm still asking. And we, as a town, voted 18 months or so ago to have equal representation on the select board, and we're still waiting for the legislature to pass it. So again, please understand my frustration about not having the kind of voice that I think you noted under representation, Jen, but I'd like you to add, if you could, vice versa. The prior commenters, not Danielle, but earlier Gabrielle spoke to that the town outside the village shouldn't have any representation that the village doesn't have. The problem that I've seen all along is that the town outside the village doesn't have representation equal to what village residents have. Of course, they are doubly represented. They have town representation on the select board, and they have village representation through the trustees. The town outside the village has town representation only on the select board, but the town outside the village does not have any representation as a district, even though people outside the village have paid a highway tax for over 100 years that has been exclusively placed on them as a taxing district. So just to be clear, the need is for 5 outside the village residents to be in those joint meetings along with those 5 village trustees in order to aid the select board to hear both sides of this issue.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here right now puzzling because I know representation is a much bigger issue than is collected in these 4 little bullets that I've written up here. But the concerns are there, right? So the concern is, how is this decision fully informed regardless of where someone is living, but in particular, how is it equal, dependent, or representative of all these different spaces in Essex? I really, because it is such a big issue, and I know you've talked about it quite a bit, don't know how to take this little, I don't know how to catalog it here. I'm going to look at Greg and Evan to see.
It's the end of the first bullet, Jen. I just need the words vice versa at the end of the first bullet, if you would.
You're looking right here. You're trying to say any accommodations that might be provided to the town outside of the village also provided to the village and vice versa.
That's I think that would sum it up.
It does sum it up for a minute, although it also, of course, raises questions for me. But there's so much in that vice versa.
Well, there is, but the select board, if they've been paying attention, which I know they have, understands what that means.
Yeah. Well, then we'll leave it at there for now. I'm going to continue to puzzle over that. That's because I can't resist thinking how this works out. Irene, does that conclude your comments?
No, if I may. Greg suggested that we should be well aware of the fact that the fire department budget would be absorbed by the town after conversations at select board meetings about that. And I would ask that in time for the 3rd forum, the chart how to pay for services also be updated to reflect the many times that people in recent meetings have spoken of using the town highway tax to pay for town outside the village services. Right now, it says decrease services, increase taxes. perhaps having a local option tax or increasing fees. And none of these things are things that the voters have asked for. But what we have said many times is that if that town outside the village highway tax were increased, then the town outside the village could pay for its own library, its own fire department, its own planning department. And that would relieve a lot of village residents of not only a tax burden, but some of their frustrations. And it would give control to outside the village residents that we have been begging for years.
Okay,
So
great.
I would like to see that chart updated, please, to include what we've been talking about at recent meetings, because right now it is not complete.
Yep. Can you, and I don't know why these words are jumbled up in my head. What's the question? If you can say the question, I'm going to type it down. Not necessarily, you have a lot of rationale too, but the question comes back to, could the highway tax, help me out here.
How many town outside the village entities could be supported by the highway tax?
Okay.
For the town, which is charged only to the town outside the village. So it's been misnamed for 100 years, but it's been a very successful way of preventing village residents from paying for something that they don't want to pay for.
Okay. Irene,
yeah.
Is that your comments, or do you have more?
How many town outside the village? Just this word many, maybe. There we go. That's great. And my final comment is, I really love the visual of knocking the meteor out of the sky. But I do think we need to be a little more grounded in our planning. And what I'd love to see is for us to have plans that include negotiated settlements on many of the questions that have plagued us for decades that will work whether or not separation passes. That is, if we could utilize that town highway tax, for example, to pay for town outside the village planning, which is currently called town planning, and that's a misnomer. If that happened, all that we need to do is limit who could serve on that. Right now, everybody inside and outside the village can sit on the town planning commission, and everybody pays for that department. Yeah. I've heard from many village residents, they don't want to pay for outside the village planning. That makes perfect sense to me. If they're willing to give up their access to seats on that planning commission, then I say the town outside the village would probably gladly take on the expense of planning exclusively for preserving open spaces and scenic views and our new town center. So I think there's all kinds of ways to be creative. And then if that were proposed as something going forward into, say, the next year's budget, whether or not we separate, we've separated the taxation and the representation in a way that should seem more fair to people, even if separation doesn't pass. Yeah. And that holds for other departments, and I won't go into that now. But that's the kind of thinking I'm looking for from my select board and anybody else in the room. Is it just ways to come at this fair representation, fair taxation question in ways that we just have never been able to creatively think outside the merger and separation boxes.
Yep.
Thanks.
So, yep. So I'm going to try, that was an awful lot, but I'm distilling it to, are there creative options or proposals that are being developed or could be developed during this interim phase that are going to be durable and transferable, whether it passes or doesn't pass? All right, we have one more comment. I think there's another hand raised, but maybe it's gone away. But we have
Mary Post.
Okay, I thought there was another one too. Mary, go ahead.
Hi, I just have a question about the next meeting. I do have something I want to say, but I don't want to just blurt it out now because I want it to be done in a really good way. So is there going to be an opportunity at the next meeting where I can speak, where I really have a better idea of what I want to say?
Oh, such a great question. So my assumption is that there's plenty of opportunities to speak at the next forum because it's still as a public forum. I don't know what form it's going to take. I mean, there will be open question prompts, very similar to this one, where you can take the conversation wherever it needs to go. But I'll probably be looking to distill some pieces of information from it. And there may be some specific questions from the select board members based on what's happened this week. Does that answer your question?
I think so, and I just want to remember that I would like to be able to speak at the next meeting because I haven't spoken yet, and I guess we'll just see how it goes. And is there also a second question? We had hoped, some of us that had been at the select board meeting, that there would be some kind of announcement of where we could send further, you send further comments to be
Yeah.
included in all this. And has that happened? Is there a place where we can send things?
You can send them to my attention.
Okay, thank you very much.
Evan, is that just always true?
Yep, yep. Now, I'm just bogged down in emails, so it may be a day or so before you even get a response that says, I got your email, but send them to me. I forward them on.
Okay,
And clarify, Jen. Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would want the remarks to become part of this report.
And that's what I was going to say, is that the comments that Jen is taking notes on are from these forums. Anybody can always reach out to Evan at eTeach at essex.org, or myself at gduggan@essex.org, or the entire select board. And Evan and I are on that email as well at selectboard@essex.org.
Okay, but would these remarks then become part of this report?
No, they would not. I'll just add something to that, Mary. Essentially, the report is going to be at this set of minutes that you're looking at now on the shared screen. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. And it's an accounting of some of the comments that have popped up here. It's not, there won't be any advice. I'm not going to be making it any prettier, or there won't be recommendations based on it. It's really trying to get a sense of what are people paying attention to.
All right.
What kind of documents?
That we can make, that some of us can make a statement at the next, because my understanding was there would be 3 opportunities to speak. So I hope the third one that we can speak. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know what? If there might be you might have some embedded feedback in there from me. You can send it to Evan, and if there's some way that these 2 forums have let you down, or left you stranded, or not given you a space to say something that you needed to say, that's good feedback to send to Evan too, because I'll certainly be paying attention to it as we look at the next Saturday forum. You know, 2 weeks will have passed by then. Lots can happen in 2 weeks. But that input about how this serves you is still incredibly important to me. So please don't hold back. So the comments keep popping up, I see, and we're also over time. I'm going to take one more comment and then move to closing down this particular forum. Lorraine, go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I wasn't going to speak, but I think you're so darn good. I want you to help facilitate, because I'm not a great public speaker. I think my primary, after kind of deconstructing why we keep past this prologue, and we've had so many prologues here in Essex, and it does keep coming back to representation, because it really, when I look at one of the complaints out here, I grew up in the village, full disclosure. I have family in the village. I love the village. I visit it often, and I understand it's part of our town. I now live in the center. I also I struggle with the names town outside the village and town inside the village. I find it, I struggle with, because it minimizes an area outside of the village, and it makes it village centric. So I struggle with that NOMER in the first place. So just to note that. So I have a unique perspective. I hear Brian also had shared that he lives outside the village. My sister as well lives lives in the center now too. So it's interesting to have grown up there and now live and be married to a man who grew up in the center as opposed to growing up in the village. So and he's still very confused often by the representation because of the trustees having their own municipality. The center used to have its own municipality as well at one point, but it did dissolve. And the center back in the 1700s when we started was the hub. And then the train came in and changed a lot. So, and that of course went through the village, and that became a junction. So there's a lot of pendulum swinging throughout, our history in Essex. So I look at representation even in the 1700s, and there were major struggles back then. There was a lot of vitriol then as well in terms of representation, and deconstructing part of it. What it looks like to me is that because we're an at-large town, and we're the second largest municipality in Vermont and at large, as opposed to Burlington that's about twice the size with 8 wards, that it really comes back to representation. And what happens, it looks like as well, is that because the village has their own municipality and the center does not, that the village is able to dilute
service, what we want for services in certain districts, because they already get certain services. So, for example, I was horrified when I was driving over to Blodgett Ovens to drop something off, and I saw a little kid walking in the road because the sidewalk was not plowed. It was piled high, way over her head. There was no way she could walk on the road. She was walking on the road on Alan Martin Drive to the elementary school. I was horrified. And then it was brought up at a recent meeting that by someone saying that the reason that we know that the services aren't in the center the way they were in the village is because, if I'm under, and I could be misquoting this person, but is because of the cost. But how do we know that if we never have district representation? And so what it feels like to me essentially is the village in a way gets a district representation because they have their own municipality. And anyone outside of that village doesn't have the ability to uniquely weigh in. And when I looked back at the KSV survey that we paid a fair amount of money for, it looks like a lot of it still holds true, which was fascinating to me, because in that it had it kind of broken down by 8.3, 8.2, and 8.1. And 8.3 certainly has its very unique needs too, and does not look like they want extra services. They're very rural comparatively and seemed most concerned about taxes. So how do we survey and how do we know what's best for each area? And also the dilution of, if the village is half of our vote and they're already satisfied with the services, in a way that dilutes our at-large voting. And I'm completely frustrated by not being listened to. And the other struggle I have in the meantime, while this all happens, because this is now this is year number 4 of taking up oxygen, there's so many other things we need to get to. And I'm frustrated with not seeing, which again goes back to representation, not seeing things on the agenda aside from separation or merger, speaking to things like, the climate change, or, so I want to see committee structure work happen in the meantime, so that the information at the ground level that we've set up actually has some accountability and is funneling into either to Evan that goes onto the agenda, or to the board, and the board helps set the agenda. I am struggling with how it seems like Evan is the only one setting the agenda through the staff, and that a number of us have raised bells and alarms about things we want work done in the meantime, and I never see that on the agenda. That's very, very frustrating. And then in terms of childcare, I'm really curious at how, or if the Y is available now, so that we know that that could be an option even now for us, as opposed to going to the EJRP. I understand that maybe COVID had an impact on that, but it certainly looks like the Y now is serving other greater areas. Also, I'm very pleased to see things like the police night out, what's national, I can't remember what it's called, but it was held at the high school. To see that level of civic engagement is so important in terms of the civility happening through this process. And having done a little bit of research through AARP and the livability index that they created 3 years ago, which is super fabulous in terms of, because you can look at something like a town our size and what people generally are looking for. And one of the highest things was engagement. And I'm concerned that's what's happening, is that people are just tired of this. And so we're no longer engaging, and we're hearing from the same voices over and over and over again. So really, it seems the heart always seems to go back to, like you said, Jen, it's so complex. I try to explain it to my husband who grew up here, and he's like, what? And really part of, to me, and it's not because I want to stay stuck in the past, but I feel like you're doomed to repeat history if you don't deconstruct and go back and look at what worked and what didn't work. So I really want to be able to work on, I think everyone in all parts of the town want safety, want, walkable communities, want, clean air and water, want all those 7 metrics that the AARP has set out for us in terms of being a livable community. the ordinances that are aligned. I want to see our ordinances aligned in the meantime. You know, there's so much that we have said over and over and over at these meetings that I don't see going on the agendas.
Okay. All right, so there's so much in there, but I think it comes back to a couple key points, which I'm pretty confident I've got down, but I'm going to trust you'll tell me if I don't. And one is about just this, how important these terms are and how they impact how people relate to each other in a town. So trying to figure out how to deconstruct those geographies and bring some more variation to them.
Exactly.
And then you've talked about the importance of carrying important work forward beyond, during, amid this separation process, and knowing how much that takes bandwidth and just wanting to see committee work continue.
Oh, well, now it's continue, but end up on the agenda somehow. You know, it's continuing, but I don't see anything work being done at the board level about it.
Yeah.
For a number of years.
Okay. And so one of the things that's helpful to see it on the agenda is the continuity and the publicity and sort of the scalability of the effort then is more visible.
Yeah.
Okay. You also talked about certain services like the child care, but also police, and the need for the stability and the model that you were talking about the policing forum, sort of the model of engagement there.
Yeah, I believe Evan certainly can speak to this, but they have been working on doing more community development, which certainly for a municipality in our size is extremely important, according to the research that I've done. And even recently looking at some of the research on the parity of open spaces in the level. It's directly proportional how many open spaces you have for public to meet in terms of level of engagement for communities like ours. So like I do see that there is some work, but I don't see it being reported back to us necessarily at a meeting or on a regular basis. So I want that kind of structure. So I hear transparency spoken about a number of times. I think that would help also ease off some of the feeling that this is the only thing that's going on. You know, clearly there's other things going on. We just had a big incident at the police station with an arrest incident on Pearl Street, and it was a big deal. And it did get brought up, but I think those kind of things need to be somehow reported back on a regular basis at board meetings or out to the public, you know, so people understand there is work going on.
Well, right, understand and have ability to engage with it. So it's not just a passive thing. Understanding is a very active stance.
Right.
Do you have confidence that I've at least gotten the gist of some of those points into these notes, or is there anything that you feel I've missed?
No, I think really the core of it is representation, which I've heard mentioned a number of times here. And I do recommend, despite hearing from some people that the KSV would not have answered that way, you know, given what has happened in the meantime. I do recommend people go back and look at those questions and really see if they would have answered them any differently, because looking back at it, it really does look like it was enough of a sampling size that it was almost pretty spot on in terms of how the merger failed and how in terms of separation, and that the same thing could happen with separation too in terms of what the issues are. If we don't kind of go back and look and understand and deconstruct, no one's going to be happy again, you know. So I want what's best, and I'm okay with the village separating. I'm not one who wants to separate, but I'm okay with that. And I do want it to be fair. So, and then the other thing to address in terms of language, this is the last thing, is like semantics in terms of saying some of the words and terminologies that are used. I think some of it coming out of negotiation, I understand that it may come off a certain way, but when we hear that a proposal and then someone asks the question back about the proposal and the answer is no, then it does become a demand. It's not a negotiation anymore, you know. So it's semantics too, and I think, like everyone has said, it's okay, guys. I like everybody still. It doesn't matter. It's not personal, you know.
Yeah. Well, your point is well taken, and it might be one of the common elements throughout all of your comments, which is words matter, and the phrases you use help define how people relate and how you relate to each other. And it doesn't mean that it has to be right the first time. This is another one of you had mentioned that sometimes you go with what you have at the moment, and when you realize that the impact isn't what you intended, then you change it up and make adjustments.
Absolutely.
And so there's absolutely nothing about this process that is going to be known all at once right now. Lorraine,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Touch base then with Greg and Evan to figure out, is there any other comments that you've been paying attention to or any other pieces that we need to know before we start to wrap up?
I
I
was just gonna do a couple quick things and then we will call it a day. One, the select board does not see the village's points as demands. They want to respect the village board in their discussions and that the village board hear it from the select board, not just in the general media or on blogs. The select board agrees that the police should be shared. It's just a matter of covering the details. Please, they understand very much that the police is a very important part of the community. Big things are how to address if the village separates. They need to be prepared for that eventuality. They are not in charge of the decision that is done by the state legislature. And that's another reason why we're listening. And when people ask, why are we asking why merger failed? Because if there is something that is going to be discussed between the village and the town for a shared service or something like that, we'd like to not repeat something that has already failed in voting. And third, people sometimes are now asking for things that neither the village nor the town has the legal authority to do. And so we will come out and go back through this list and say what we believe the town and or the village has the authority to do in under current state law. And if it is not under current state law, we would have to ask the state for that authority. With that, I could.
You say with that, and I think, oh man, now everyone just has a ton more questions.
Yeah, well, and then, oh yeah, one last thing. Why does the staff recommend something like the fire department of the village, their budget be put under the town? You'd have to know how taxation and equity work, but if you put the budget into the town budget, like we've done police, like we've done other things, public works, then everyone in the town, including the village, pays once in the tax rate of the town. And that's equity, the way we see it. So while we might suggest the fire department, somebody else might suggest capital, fine, it's money all the same. And so that's tax equity as we see it from a staff point of view. We make recommendations to the boards. They make this, they put it in the budget, and then they have public forums. So the village and the residents in the town review it, and then you all vote on it.
So here's I don't know about any of you who are online, but I will say lots of times when I sit with Evan, I feel like I'm getting a crash course in a bunch of things I had no idea about. And so there's not room in this forum to ask questions, but Evan, if people are wondering about some of those things that you've said or trying to engage with them, how do they get to ask those questions? Do they email you?
Email me at eteach@essex.org or eteach@essexjunction.org. They both come to the same place. Please understand, I have a village and a town to run through my staff, and I'm in meetings all day, so emails get done when I'm not in night meetings or day meetings.
You used to do coffee chats. Are you doing those anymore?
And there's going to be a coffee chat. Well, I don't have a public coffee chat done ready. I think that's going to be in several weeks, but I have another one with staff and the boards. That's just an internal. But email is one way. Greg and others help me sometimes answer these, but I can try to schedule a coffee chat as well in the coming weeks.
Oh, I don't want to put more things on your to-do list, but it's good to know how to get answers when you have questions.
Sleep's not relevant.
It is relevant. It's relevant for everyone. All right, Greg, anything else that I've forgotten? I'm preparing to move to next steps.
Yeah, no, thank you all for coming. Appreciate the comments, and
And the next step will be that I take some of these notes and clean them up. I'm going to do that now, actually, and I'll submit that to the two of you, that you'll be bringing that to the select board then. And you will learn more about the shape of the Saturday forum 2 weeks from now as we get closer.
The next Saturday forum, it's going to be Saturday, August 21st, 9 a.m. Probably same amount of time, about an hour and a half. I will put a link in the chat to get more information if you want to follow along, and go to the town website to get more information about the upcoming forum. Please do. And as Evan said, feel free to reach out to him, to me. Once again, thank you all for your time today and on Wednesday for those who attended.
One last thing, please be safe. COVID is real. We are wearing masks in this room because we have people who are concerned about that and what their children may not be vaccinated. So please, if you have not been vaccinated, please consider becoming vaccinated. And if not, wear your mask, wear you indoors. Please.
Is that, pardon me, is that what the notes you've been taking going to be posted somewhere?
Do they get posted with the minutes?
They'll be included in the upcoming select board packet for August 17th.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody, and thank you for your participation.
Bye, everyone.